morning. My name is Richard Miller, and we're with the Center for Global Peace Through Commerce at Dominican University. And our project of global peace through commerce, but first of all, global peace through the individual, because the individual is who sparks the commerce. And we're investigating what it is within us that allows us to run a peaceful business and run a peaceful life. And for that, we want to investigate our whole inculturation process, starting with our education, even from the very young. And we're with Helen Hughes today, and you're in Vancouver, Helen, right? Welcome.
Thank you.
And Helen is the founder, as I understand it, of a remarkable school experiment, let's call it, but it's more than an experiment, called Windsor House. And so we want to know more about what is it that really allows people to have an interest, to follow an interest, to be passionate about life, and to really be fulfilled by that passion in a way that they don't feel like they have to lean on their fellow man.
Thank you for inviting me. Windsor House is experimental, but it is actually 40 years old. But we've been experimenting for 40 years, so I think we still qualify. We started as a parent participation school because I felt having parents in working together as a community was a very important thing to be doing. And so we started out with a small group of 15 children and their parents, and we knew a lot of what we didn't want to do, but we didn't really know what we did want to do. So we tried this and we tried that, and it evolved into a school of 200 with, it's a public school. When we were about 4 years old, we asked the public school system to take us over, and they did. And I think it's very important for there to be public funding for alternative kinds of schools, because otherwise you cut out too many people. Anyway, so we carried on and eventually got to a place where we had the students pretty well running their own affairs. So they decided what they wanted to learn, and they decided how they want, not just the students, that's not fair to say that, but students and the whole community. But the students were the majority of the people at any given meeting. So they essentially had more votes than the rest of us did, most of the time. But we found that students made excellent decisions. You'd think that, on money, and they had control of a $10,000 budget a year, and they made excellent decisions. So
now, when you're saying students, what are the ages of the students?
Kindergarten to grade 12.
Even the kindergartens had the votes that the older students had?
And sometimes the kindergartens would just cut through all the discussion and the ins and outs of things and say, well, why don't we just such and so? And we'd all go, oh, that's so simple. Why don't we? So it evolved to a really beautiful thing, and we enjoyed it very much. However, as time went on and as school boards became more and more nervous about being sued for this and that, and ministries became more directive and more able to check what people were doing, we were no longer able to continue under public funding doing the kind of thing that we were doing. So we, being a very flexible group, started finding a way of keeping public funding and continuing what we really believed in, which was everybody becoming the best of who they were.
So now everybody, let's just kind of relook at this, because like, as I understand it, everybody is a stakeholder. So the parents, first of all, the whole concept is that the students and and the parents are together in this. So that
Students, parents, staff, and volunteers. We have a lot of alumni come back and volunteer. A lot of people in the community find us very interesting. They volunteer. So we're just all one big community, and we all have a vote.
So then that's already very interesting, and maybe tells us about how things run in other parts of the world, because there's more than just the money economy going here, that people are volunteering, that parents are getting involved, so that there's actually the family economy, there's a volunteer economy or some kind of a love economy. And
Yeah.
it's not just about money and they ought to spend more on this, and some they ought to do it to us.
Right.
And so then there's a great ownership here.
Yes, I mean that's one of the things we say. They is us. There's no point saying at Windsor House. There's no point saying they ought to this, that, or the other thing, because
that means you. That means me, right?
Yeah. So
and so
anyway,
we find that in the way we're finding that. Then let me just rephrase this and paraphrase it and see if it's right. That we're finding that students and teachers are actually coming up with, or guiding the curriculum and guiding and just trying to follow interest as close as possible.
Well, yeah. Let me explain how we do it now. The teachers, the teaching staff, which is publicly paid teachers, trained teachers, take the things that the children are doing through their interests, and they make the connections to what the curriculum is. So the ministry has set out the curriculum. And so let's say a child is interested in horses. So they meet with the student and find out all the things that come out of that interest in horses. And they can say, oh, well, that's social studies. Oh, there's some math there. There's some this. They pull out the what they call the PLOs, the provincial learning outcomes, from what the children are doing of their own accord. So,
is this a multi-level classes where different grades are together, like the old one-room school, or?
Yes, it's multi-age, but it's hard to get one's head around Windsor House because there aren't really classes as such. There are classes offered. For instance, there's a straight Math 10 class offered. And anyone who wants to get credit for Math 10 goes, that's one way of getting it. You could go to the Math 10 class, and you could be any age. But you could get Math 10 other ways if you wanted to. So there are classes, but there's people of all ages in the classes, and the classes aren't necessarily taught by the teachers. A student may give a class. For instance, there is a student giving a class on horses. And so she has a very keen group of, I think she's got about 8 children taking her horse class. And so she's getting credit for something in personal development about running a class. And then the little kids who are taking her class could be getting credit for what they're learning in the class.
And so you're saying that she's teaching a horse class, but there could be some Math 10. They could be getting Math 10 credits too. Is that correct? I don't know.
Well, she's teaching a horse class, and whatever can be pulled out of that class. For instance, if there is math in everything, and we'll just use math as an example. If there's something about what she's teaching that has a math component, then that will be noted in the student's e-portfolio. So the students don't get, they're not in classes necessarily, but they could take a class if they wanted to. If they wanted to just do what kids in regular school do, which is go to a class and have it presented and write a test and pass the course, they can do that. But they don't have to get their credits that way. They can live the life that they want to lead, and then the staff person who's sponsoring, mentoring them, will pull out from what they do in their own life the various pieces of curriculum that are appropriate. And sometimes they're doing stuff that's way beyond their age. And sometimes they're doing stuff that's behind their age median. But what we find is that we have very alive young people who are pursuing their own educations. They're not having it spoon-fed into.
That's
And then
amazing.
and then we're
That's truly
taking notes.
amazing.
And then we're doing we used to use the portfolio method, which is you bring something you've written and you put it in your portfolio, and you bring a picture of you riding a horse and you put it in your portfolio, and you bring all kinds of things. You actually put them in your portfolio. But now we put them on an e-portfolio. So everything is put into your particular little portfolio that's on the computer. And so if you've written something, then the digital text is there. If you've recorded something, then the audio is there. And so what you're amassing is a huge data bank of the kinds of things that you do, the kinds of things that you are moved to do.
Wow.
And you can access that database when you want to write a resume. You go through your database and you say, well, let's see, I want to get a job. I want to be a volunteer for the SPCA or the dog walking or something. So you go through your database and you pull out all the things that you've done over the years that show that you love being with animals. And so you make it into a little DVD, and you take it to the
Wow.
people and you say, have a look at this.
Just tell me a little bit about the details, because I mean, okay, the mentors have to be quite astute at seeing in your interest, and then kind of being familiar with the different categories in the so-called state curriculum, so that
Yeah.
they could say, oh, this satisfies that, and then can they do that in normal classroom numbers, or the class, or each mentor
Yeah,
has
normal
only
numbers.
smaller amount of people, or
Oh, no, same pupil teacher ratio, but they also have the help of the children and the parents, because they too are involved in finding the connections. And so it's a it's a it's a group project rather than the onus being on any single individual. Um, the parents can give an offering. So a parent would, I mean, we have parents in the school all the time. It's a parent involvement school. So somebody's doing cooking in the big community room, and someone's doing finger weaving in another room, and someone's offering guitar in the hall, and
wow.
it's parents all over the place, and volunteers. Just the other day, a volunteer was in doing a huge Lego project. Another grandparent was in showing his things about the war, all his uh, photos and things that he gathered about World War II.
You mentioned about volunteers, and also some of the volunteers are alumni. So then, over 40 years, these alumni have grown up and gone to further education and have
Yeah,
careers and have their own families, and maybe have their kids in the school. I don't know. And
we've had that. Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
then we really know the results of this education, because
Yes, but interestingly enough, I mean, a lot of schools um, judge their competence by how many lawyers and um, doctors and so on,
the professionals.
professionals. But we judge our effectiveness by how many people are happy with their lives and are contributing members of society. And so we find that of the young people that keep in touch, and I have about 500 who keep in touch with me, um, they're doing wonderful things. They're uh, volunteering. They're down helping third world countries. They're um, uh, involving themselves in community. They're growing organic gardens. They're really they really care about the world and their place in it. And so a lot of our young people are just I'm thrilled beyond belief. And of course, we have young people who are not doing very well and who are struggling, and as any large group would play out that way. So we don't we don't say, oh yes, everyone that goes to Windsor House does well. Because we often get children who have been really badly treated in the mainstream school, either bullying or they have some learning disability that hasn't been handled well. They come to us and they spend several years just recovering, just being in a community that just likes them for who they are. They don't have to perform. They don't. And then they
That
start.
must sink in, though, really deeply. I mean, even if you're not getting it cerebrally, you're feeling it. And it must
Yes,
make a huge difference, right, as far as coming out and being okay with yourself and being okay with
yeah,
all these earlier hurts.
yeah. And several young people have told me they sincerely believe that Windsor House actually saved their lives because they were in deep depression and couldn't see any future for themselves.
Did I get it right that you said there was 200 students? Is that the size of the school, or
At
is it?
peak, right now there's 120. And the reason was that we got moved and we're too far from a bus for many people to make it. It's a shame. We're hoping to move again next year, at the end of this year. So that will.
So then, how many mentors or teachers are there then?
Well, there's 5.3 teachers and I think 3 aides. And then all the rest are parents and volunteers and alumni.
So with such a good volunteer ratio, maybe your school is less expensive to run. That whole model
So
is less expensive.
it's actually the same in cost because what we don't get less cost, what we do get is more richness and smaller groups. So any group that you would be leading, it'd be surprising to have it be more than 12 children in a group. And the other thing is that it's hard to get one's head around. The best analogy I can think of for Windsor House is it's a combination of a really good daycare and university.
Wow.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, there's a place for children to play. There's lots of spots for children to just play. And so there's the cottage, which the young children hang out in mostly. But anyone can go in there. And there's the big muscle room, which is for just running around and yelling and hitting each other with pillows. So there's places where you can just be young and play. And then there are places where classes, actual formal classes happen, and the door is closed, and while that class is on, they expect to not be interrupted and so on. And so that's sort of the university end and the daycare end. And there's everything in between. In the band room, the band is, we've several bands have emerged through Windsor House that are now playing for money. And the kids who are into that, they go into the band every morning. That's where they go. They practice and practice and practice.
Wow.
And, yeah. And then there's various activities that happen in various spaces. So as a 10-year-old, you could come in and you might spend some time playing with Lego. And then you might wander out and see something interesting going on in another room, and you could join it. So there's very little formality, except in the sort of more university-type classes. But the rest of the time, people are wandering around, and you can leave a class whenever you like.
It's so interesting that you say it's between a daycare and a university. I could see that it's also grad school because, like, if you're doing your own research project, you're researching horses.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
So then there's no glass ceiling. There's no ceiling that says, no, you're only in grade school.
Yeah.
Do what I say.
Yeah, exactly. And quite often the children will go out and find their own mentors. So, for instance, just to keep with this one horse example, a young woman who's so into horses, she has found someone in the riding community that she admires very much, and so she uses her as a mentor because she has more information and more.
Was she able to bring that mentor in, perhaps, and address her class of 8 students?
Yeah, I don't think she has yet, but she well might. Yeah. that's the kind of thing that happens. So when you walk into Windsor House, you just see young people moving around and chatting and so on. And then if you go into the rooms, you will see the library is full of young people reading, or the young people actually run the library. They do the books in and out, so on. Or so the library committee will be working away. Oh, also children they sponsor rooms. So we used to have what was called hostile takeovers, but they made a rule against that. A hostile takeover would be if a group of children had a room, but they weren't holding their meetings on a regular basis, and so people weren't able to get licensed to use the room. And so then a bunch of kids would go to the school council and say, we want to take over the such and so room. And so suddenly the people who had been in charge of it aren't in charge of it. And so there was great upset, and then children had to work through that. And we do a lot of helping kids work through their problems. We say, you don't want to never have problems. You just want to have a really good set of skills of how to deal with them. So they learn a lot of that. We use the NVC model. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, tell me.
It's called the Nonviolent Communication. And it's pioneered by Marshall Rosenberg. And it's just a good way of hearing other people and finding a way to work together to resolve problems rather than win-lose. It's win-win.
What I'm visualizing is like a mini community where people have their rooms, their territories, and then they're supposed to do something in these territories that's useful for everybody. In other words, sponsor meetings that are of interest and follow projects. And in other words, it's almost like having a plot in the city, and then you've got a real estate tax, and if you're not using it enough to pay that tax, you have to give up your land, and somebody else will start a better enterprise there. And of course, the model is all the enterprises that the students from last year made and that you were dropping in on, and then you see, it just grows from that. It grows from, it's
exactly.
modeled.
So some rooms are open. That is, there's no council, no room council. And so, for instance, the community room is open. And most of the time you can go in and heat up your burrito or whatever you want to do in the community room. But if you leave stuff out or, somehow make a problem for the rest of the community, then you'll lose your ability to be, it goes to school council, and school council decide what to do. The wonderful thing about school council, made up mostly of young people, is they don't think punitively. They think in terms of, how can we actually make this better? So if a young person left their things out all the time in the community room, the school council would be more likely to go and talk with the young person and find out why it's hard for them to remember to clean up, and is there any support that could be put in place so that they could start taking on that responsibility, things like that. Very compassionate underpinnings.
It's so neat that this just comes from community in a way, because the classes are mixed ages. So then when the older students leave and go on to another school, the younger ones are still in the swing of things and have the whole culture. They're enculturated in how the school works. It's not like that the so-called teachers have to start with a new batch and they have to start from scratch and they have to,
exactly.
It's amazing. It's like a living being that you've created.
Yeah. And it is. It has taken on a life of its own. So I was one of the early 40 years ago starters of the school, but it attracted people who then put their piece in, and it has grown. All the people who come put in their own little part, and so it has turned into this amazing community. I go down there twice a week, and I'm involved in the community gatherings and whatnot. And I go down and I come home feeling better all the time. I always am uplifted by having been there. And that's not just me. That's the community input over 40 years has built this amazing.
Gee, it's so amazing because our normal classrooms and so on are separate, and then we progress through 4 years. Let's say in a university, but I
Yes,
mean,
yeah,
in a high school too, or
yeah,
whatever the model is, and then each it's these different strata that go through this prescribed course, and somehow because they're not together, they don't. What's learned on the higher strata is not is not
passed on.
not automatically passed on to the lower strata. It's always the job of the teacher to reinstill those values and so on. And so then you're saying, I mean, what I'm getting, and it's the first time I've ever really thought of something like this, is that actually the school culture is a living being, and it's
Yes,
40 years old now, and everything that you put in it and everyone else put in it is still there. You go into that living being
yeah,
and be a part of it,
yeah.
and
We've had various people come in to the school, be placed at the school because we're a public school, who are appalled by children calling teachers by their first name, um, wandering around. And another interesting thing about Windsor House is, well, two interesting things that people pointed out to me. I haven't noticed them, but one is there's no graffiti. There's no graffiti in the washrooms. There's no graffiti anywhere. It's interesting. The other thing is that
so there's
when
nothing suppressed that needs
yeah,
to be on the walls. You could just say it.
yeah. The other thing is that whether there's an adult there or not doesn't really make much difference to what goes on in the room. So I have a class that I teach that I love. It's called WHIM. What is it stands for what have I missed? So quite often children come who've been at Windsor House for a long time think, oh, wait a minute. I see all my friends coming home with packs of homework and they're sitting in class all day. What have I missed by being at Windsor House? So we look at uh, all the information there is in the world and the teeny little bit of information that most of us have. And we say, what have you missed? You've missed a lot. But there's no way anyone has all of it. So why don't we just pursue the bits that we like? So we just have this amazing class that just runs from one topic to another. And so when I'm there and I have to go off to get an extension cord or something, the class carries on without me. It's not dependent on an adult. So that's more university type.
Oh my God! I mean, even without school, life just carries on. Life
Yes,
carries on to learn. I mean, that learning never leaves your life. That
exactly.
interest
Yeah.
and that sincerity
Right.
to be with what's real about your life is just
Yeah.
totally instilled. I can really see it. It just makes total sense. I mean, I feel like I'm there, just smiling with you.
I'll tell you a lovely story. We've had several people, as I was saying, come in totally appalled and then be completely won over. And so this is the kind of incident that wins children over. I just happened to see this one. An administrator from another school had come in, and there were two little girls lying in the middle of the hall on the floor, and they were about 8 or 9. And the administrator came and said, "You can't lie in the middle of the hall like that." And they beamed at her and said, "But we are." And she was completely disarmed. I mean, how could you take offense? And so just those kinds of things happening over and over, she was completely won over.
I had a really good experience with school. It was amazing. I was 2 years ago. I was in India,
Mm-hmm.
and I met another woman that had made a school. I think it was maybe 15 years it's been going or something like that. And she started just with her daughter and her daughter's friend,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's up to maybe 400 or 500 students, and it's the whole and the ages are 4 to 14, and the whole premise is that students should learn from happiness.
Oh, I love
And so
that.
exactly what you're doing, see, because I mean, happiness is a natural state, so that you're doing that because there's no pressure from the top. You got to conform to this
Yeah.
model. You've got to.
What's the name of that school?
I have to remember, but I mean, um,
Inter-
I don't remember it right now, but I have all the stuff. In fact, I've got about 2 hours of video of those kids. I think I'll produce it and show it to you. I've
Yeah.
never really made it because I didn't know where it would fit, but I mean, it was just an amazing experience. I mean, it was a kind of a triangular building, and they had this triangular courtyard, and all the kids got out in there, and they kind of presented me with like a gift of like they honored me by being a visitor, and then I guess that was just their morning uh, assembly, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And then some different classes put on some performances so I could see him, and I filmed a lot of stuff. And oh, it was
Great.
totally amazing. Like everyone was just totally lit, and
Yeah.
uh, and that's what you're doing. I can just see it.
Yeah.
Whether you say that's what it is, or I don't know exactly how you condense that in a few words, that just people should follow their interest, I guess is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I look towards a society that honors um, different people's um, interests and abilities, different people abilities and passions. So I think we're coming from a place where it was very narrow what one could respect, and now it's broadening because of the internet. Um, More and more, we're finding, oh well, this kind of sort of uh, very different kind of artist. Well, all these people like this art that this person does, so maybe there is something to it. And then uh, uh, now nerds are having their day because of Bill Gates, right? It used to be you're a nerd, you're nobody. But now you're a nerd. Hey, wait, you may be a multimillionaire. Who
That's
knows?
you're a specialist now.
Yeah, and so no longer is it that you have to be, in order to be respected, you need to be rich and educated. I mean, in England, it wasn't enough to be rich. You had to come from a good family. But now you can make your own. You can build your own respect base. You don't have to have been born into a respected group. You don't have to claw your way into a respected group. You can just be fully yourself, and those people in your environment who are able to respect you. And so you can, it's really important to be respected, to be genuine.
Wow, that is so right on. Because like what you said, it used to be in England you could never cross over if you didn't have the blood. No
Right?
matter what you did, didn't matter. So you couldn't be respected. Okay, then America was supposed to be what broke that and said,
Yes.
okay, you can be respected. There's no blue bloods anymore. But
Yeah.
still, it didn't work in a way because in what you said, is very narrow who can be respected.
Yeah.
And so we have a very narrow set of concepts, and people from outside of our concepts are
Mm-hmm.
just too different, and it's just too scary. And
Yeah.
now, more than it's just the state of the world, and not so much the internet, maybe, but just the state of the world. Well, the internet tells us what the state of the world is, and we realize
Internet
it's got
puts
to
us
be
in.
wider. Who can be respected? It
Yeah.
has to widen, and that's what
Yeah.
we're all about here at Center for Global
Yes.
Peace. Because I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
respect is the first. After respect can come listening, and after listening can come understanding. But without
Yeah.
respect, you can't even listen.
Yeah. Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
So we really thank you, Helen. We're with Helen Hughes and at the Windsor House.
Well,
Many years, a whole lifetime of dedication to
I was just
making
going to say, I
society work.
started I started Windsor House in my house with 15 children, and I started it for my daughter who wasn't thriving in school. And so that's why it was called Windsor House, is because we were a house on Windsor Road, and we couldn't agree on what to call the school. So there was sunshine in those days, the 70s, Sunshine Place and Rainbow End and so on. And when we took a vote, each idea got one vote because so we finally settled on collaboratively on Windsor House just as a temporary name until we came up with something we could all agree on. So here we are still with Windsor House. Anyway, thank you very much, and it was interesting chatting with you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, everybody. And again, Richard Miller, Center for Global Peace Through Commerce, Dominican University. So, thank you for coming.